Good evening. Just as I was finishing the dedication, I had this image of a bird, brushing a mountain with its wing, a kalpa, because we were, that last line in the dedication says, may we practice without discouragement for an ocean of eons. And the word eon took me to the word kalpa, which in Buddhism is said to be an immeasurably long period of time, which, if you were to measure it, would correspond roughly to the time it would take a flying bird to wear down a mountain by flying over it and brushing it with its wing once every 100 years. So it's a very, 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 very long time. And this is what we are vowing, to practice for that long without discouragement. It's not a small thing, not an easy thing. But this is exactly what is needed, isn't it? There is another saying that an instant, a moment, a single moment contains 1,000 kalpas. So you don't really have to worry about that very, very, very long period of time. You just have to be in this moment now. And that takes care of the whole thing. So that's one way of saying that really what is needed, all that is needed, is to be wholehearted, to practice without discouragement in this moment. That's it. To truly practice without discouragement in this moment, which means when discouragement appears, you practice that. Tonight, I wanted to speak about, in a rather roundabout way, which I hope may prove not to be so roundabout in the end, but I wanted to speak about a quality that is not really spoken of very much, I don't think. But I think that it is a necessary quality for practice, to practice fearlessly, to practice earnestly without discouragement, and that is the quality of precision. And so if you could just hold that in your mind, and I'll make my way to it. This short excerpt is by a teacher named Norma, Ryuko, Kaweloku, Wong, Roshi, from a new book that she just released called When No Thing Works. She says, there is a maddening amount of falling apartness in the universe. So much so that even the intrepid are daunted, attached to the pain and to our plans, and just overwhelmed by the urgency of defense. This I observe as I stand or crouch in the median strip of applied spirituality. In transformational work, it is the crisis that opens the way for big leaps. When things are going relatively well, there is no need to question, and not enough energy to force the momentum of inconvenient stretches. As ironic as it may seem, it is hopeful for humankind that everything feels and looks like a jumble at the edge of a precipice. And from this threshold, the biggest of leaps. "2025 came thundering in, globally, individually. There's a lot of uncertainty, we know this. There's a lot of upheaval. And You know, sometimes when the sheer speed and the volume of things is what it is, it becomes challenging, right? To see how to respond, what to take up, what to tackle. And I have always felt, and this is completely my personal opinion, but I have always felt that a religious tradition, in order to really be that, in order to be called that, needs to show us how to live well. It needs to show us how to lay down a brick, and then the next one, and the one after that. And most of you know this is a reference that I make with some frequency to a story by Ursula Le Guin, which I love, called Things, which is really, it begins at the moment where things stop being what we know them to be, at the threshold of what some people call the end of the world. The story begins when a bricklayer by the name of Liv dreams of an island, a distant actually set of islands beyond the range of what he can see. So he hasn't really seen them with his eyes, with his senses, but he dreams of them, and he intuits with a certainty that surprises even him that his salvation is in these islands. And so he decides he needs to get there somehow. The only way that he knows how to do this is to make a road. As a bricklayer, this is what he decides to do, to make a road. But he's right at the edge of the ocean. And so without really knowing exactly what he's doing, certainly without knowing where the road is going to lead him, or if he will be able to get there, or if he's really just going to his death, he makes this road, he builds this road straight into the ocean. I have always loved that image, because he just has this absolute faith that this is something he must do. Again, he cannot know where it's going to take him, but he knows this is something he has to do. And really, all of life is like this, right? We don't really know where the path is taking us, but we trust, based on what we see, what we live in each step that we take, that this path that we're on, and here now I am speaking of the spiritual path, is a true path. Because others have walked it, because as we lay down a brick and we step on it and we see that it holds, that gives us a little bit more confidence. And so we trust that it will take us to this place that where we want to be, the place of liberation, a place where suffering is not the norm, where conflict is not widespread, where truth and integrity and basic humanity, basic decency are in fact still values that we want to live by. And so then I would extend the requirement, if you will, of a religious tradition, that it must show us how to live well, and it must support us in that doing, in the hard work of living the truth of our living, which is that interconnectedness with everything else, that recognition that everything that I do in this moment, which has no beginning or end, contains those thousands of kalpas, is true for everybody else, for everybody else's moment. And so this path needs to support my living in such a way that I don't create more suffering. Surely for me, and for those people that I'm close to, and for those people that I'll never know. I think I said recently in a talk that our practice is world building. Because we do have to, in a way, face the end of our world, the old world of samsara, that world in which things don't fit. They don't mesh. That's why it doesn't feel good. That's why it doesn't feel right. That's why it's not easeful, because they don't work. Our disparate ways, our conflicted ways, our going about our separate ways, it doesn't work. And so standing at the threshold of something we can't see, the world is burning behind us. And we know that is not the way. But we can't see the way forward. And still, something compels us, and something helps us to trust, to take that step and find a way right under our feet, because where else would we find it? And so spending time with my teacher friends group, we started reading this book. One of them recommended it. And Norma Wong Roshi is an 86th generation Zen master. I mean, I was trying to wrap my head around that. Our lineage, just the male lineage, has 86 names on it. And maybe they're not all, single generations. So I don't know if this is like what she's referring to, although she's in a Rinzai lineage, or that it truly is like her family, her ancestors can be traced back 86 generations of Zen masters. Regardless, this would have to produce an extraordinary human being. And from the little that I have read of her writing, I believe this is so. I said to my friends, I said, God, I would really love to meet her. She lives in Hawaii. And so we're plotting inviting her to our group when we finish the book, see if she would like to talk to us about it. But she's not just a Zen master, she's also spent most of her life in policy. So she's a policymaker, she was a legislator, she's a storyteller and a poet. And right now she's back in policy because she's doing a lot of work to protect land in Hawaii. She did a lot of work to protect language. And so she has, it sounds like for most of her life, straddled, the world of religion, the world of politics, the world of practice, the world of, you could say, religious practice, and the world of doing in the world. And so she's really someone who has dedicated her life to building, what my teacher would refer to as that archive of sanity. He was speaking specifically of monasteries. She's also the abbot of a monastery. But extending that into land and into community. And I really love how she describes herself as standing or crouching as life is speeding by, crouching on the median of applied spirituality. And, in one sense, all spirituality should be applied, right? Should be applied spirituality. since, abstract spirituality does not transform. It doesn't deliver, as far as I'm concerned. It'd be like having a map that doesn't match the topography. It makes a nice print, nice wall hanging, but it's little more than that. And so to be true spirituality, a true spiritual path, I believe it needs to be applied implicitly. On the other hand, I do think it's useful and important to make explicit the necessity of ensuring that this is so, that the path we're actually on leads to transformation. Not because we can force or will that transformation into being, but that we, as much as we're able, are ensuring that our practice is relevant and applicable to all of our lives. That we, in the doing of our own practice, are allowing for that transformation to take place. And so, of my own insistence, my stress on translating the Dharma, as it were, so that we can use it, every day and in every way that we need to use it. And as I was reflecting on this once again, given the state of things, I was thinking of this work as, as having 5 parts, or five parts, really, because they're not stages. It's not chronological, but having five components. Study, which includes, in this case, realization, the actual seeing of what you're studying. Translation, integration, practice, and expression. And of course, you can think of these 5 parts as applying to formal Dharma, but also just to all living. Since Dharma is reality, we can think of how we go about making sense of our lives, understanding our lives, and I think these stages still apply. And really, as we make our way through these stages, it's like we're climbing down a spiral staircase. The more we study and the more we practice, the deeper we go, ideally, hopefully, the deeper we go into our own being, into our own mind. And so each time we get to a teaching, each time we meet a Dharma we've met before, it is not the same, and neither are we. Because with time, we have gained, hopefully, depth and experience, insight, and the combination of these brings about wisdom, and I hope some facility, some skill to be able to apply what we've seen to our lives. Right? So we see a little bit more of what we had not yet seen, and we do a little bit more than we were not able to do before. And sometimes I talk about that rather, uncomfortable time, that period of time between seeing and doing. When you see something that you hadn't seen before about your mind, about your habits, about your reactivity, about the particular things you get stuck on, your particular kleshas, your flavor of klesha, if you will, and you're not yet able to do it differently. It's a really uncomfortable place to be. But it's a really important place to be, because that very discomfort, it's showing you there's work that needs to be done. Right, as Wong Roshi said, when things are going well, when they're easy, there's not much need to question. There's not that momentum. How did she say the momentum? not enough energy to force the momentum of inconvenient stretches. It's a little bit of awkward wording, but I think she means, there's not enough energy to get you through what will be an inconvenient stretch, what will absolutely be uncomfortable, will try you in ways that perhaps you don't want to be tried. But there is life. And in order to meet it, you must stretch. When things are easy, you coast along. You don't just create difficulty for the sake of difficulty. I mean, I hope you don't. Life already does that enough for us. But so it's in these moments where things become very stark, where things are uncomfortable, that we can use that momentum, that we can use that discomfort to help us take that next step. Now, it's not just a spiral staircase. It's really also like one of those Escher stairs, right? That they're going in every direction and they don't really end, and they're all interconnected. They're enmeshed because study is practice, right? You can't really separate them the way that we study, at least. Practice must have integration if we're going to have it work in our lives. The work of translating the Dharma into our lives already involves expression, and expression requires study, etc., etc. And so, if you think of study, which is not academic study, right? Is not the accumulation of knowledge, of information. It's really more like immersion. Because in order to see and in order to express reality, we have to let it permeate our whole being. I can offer you the most poetic, most evocative. I think I've written about this, in fact, about the bliss that is that first sip of milky tea in the early morning. As I sit on the balcony, the lights of the cargo ships waiting to enter the Panama Canal. And then there's the gliding lights of the planes approaching the airport. Lucas sighing contentedly at my feet. The barest touch of that ocean breeze on my skin. I could evoke for you all of the senses involved in that moment, and it still would not come as close as it needs to the actual of the moment, to the isness. In order to know what I mean, you would have to feel it yourself. You would have to be it yourself. But how do you do that when clearly you're not sitting here in Panama with me? You are not me. Maybe you don't even like tea. How do you make my experience your experience for the sake of what? Understanding another's world, for the sake of understanding the nature of being. What I mean is, how do you be a cypress tree when you're not a tree? Well, you don't do it by thinking about it. You don't do it by knowing. how to go about it. You have to let go of the thought that separates us. The thought that says, but I'm not a tree, but I'm not Zuisei, but I'm not this. So when the sutras, when the teachings say that we have to be an empty vessel in order to receive the Dharma, they really mean it. This is really true. Because anything we know takes up space. And that space is space that the Dharma cannot penetrate. So I was thinking of an image, it's like you take a piece of clothing that you want to dye. Let's say that you want to dye it a very rich red color. But then, because you're deluded, you tie knots. You tie a bunch of knots into it. Well, we know what happens when we do that. It will come out tie-dyed, right? The dye won't be able to get into the fabric that was knotted up. Well, a thought is like one of those knots. And so the ink can't get in there. The fabric doesn't transform. I can't. I'm not. They are not. Not. K-N-O-T. So in one sense, Dharma is the unbinding, the untying of these knots. I've always loved that term, the unbinding, is one of the ways that the Buddha referred to liberation. He said the unborn, the undying. He also called it the unbinding. Because it just feels like what it is. Whether it's actual liberation, Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, or just that moment, that instant in which you just let go. You just let go. And there, the ink can penetrate. There, the water can drench. But it has to be, the fabric has to be open, has to be extended, has to breathe. Right? Shinko is referring to that tightness. It has to breathe. And so how do you study like this? First, by practicing not tying the knots. You sit with a question, you sit with an occurrence, an event in your life, and you don't know. Whether you're sitting formally or you're taking a shower, you're making yourself breakfast, you truly practice not knowing. I mean, we've heard this so many times. And people nod, when I say that, you have to not know. And they're like, yeah. Well, you're knowing. In that moment, you're knowing. And then a thought pops up, oh, it's this. Oh, this is how I'm going to show it to Zuisei. I'm going to bring this. And then people bring props. Don't bring props. That already means you're separate. You understand? You don't need props to show me reality. Just bring yourself. Trust that you by yourself have everything you need. And that if you express it clearly, I will understand you. And so when a thought pops up, oh, it must be this. Not untie it. How? Am I sure? Am I sure? Let me find out. My own practice is I see it, I set it aside and come back and look again and look again. Sometimes I will see what I had seen before, right? It gets confirmed because there's a moment of clarity. But most often, what I had thought I had seen was just the very tip. It was like skimming the very tip of what I could have seen. And by setting it aside, being a little bit patient, I can go a little bit deeper. The reason doubt is one of the 3 pillars of Zen is because it supports this kind of not knowing. In transformational work, Wong Roshi said, it is the crisis that opens the way for big leaps. The crisis of faith, the crisis of confidence, the crisis of understanding. What is the next step? I don't see it. I don't know. Excellent place to begin. I don't know. Because the interesting thing is that ignorance, my teacher was just saying this in a recent talk, ignorance is not really that we don't know. Ignorance, delusion, in Buddhist terms, is actually a whole lot of knowing. It's a whole lot of misconstruing of reality. It's very difficult for most of us to truly not know. It's very hard. So isn't it ironic that it's not really our ignorance that stops us, it's our knowledge. It's knowing too much for our own good. But when you don't know, all sorts of things become possible that a moment ago were not possible. There's a story that I've always loved of a teacher who, a very well-known Zen teacher, and I couldn't remember his name and I couldn't find it, but the emperor had called him to serve as an advisor to the court, to be kind of like his spiritual advisor. And this Zen teacher did not want to do that. And so he took off his robes and went to live under a bridge. And so he was living, just like a vagrant under a bridge, trying to go under the radar. And so the emperor calls one of his officers and says, I've heard that he loves watermelons, this teacher. So go out there on the streets one afternoon with a cart full of watermelons. And then whenever you see, one of these guys under the bridge, I guess there were lots of them, just offer them a watermelon. When one of them approaches, say to him, take this watermelon without using your hands. And the guy who'll be able to respond, that's the teacher, grab him and bring him. So there the officer goes. He goes under the bridge where our friend, the Zen master, is, and he hears, the officer proclaiming, there's free watermelons. So he comes out really happy, and the officer has the watermelon in his hand. The Zen master is about to take it. He says, take this watermelon with using your hands. And without missing a beat, the master says, give it to me without using your hands. They nabbed him. They nabbed him. He had to go to court. But there's another way to respond. Give me the watermelon without using your hands. Speak the truth without opening your lips. These aren't puzzles. These aren't games. They're pointing to my life, to your life. You have to stop knowing in order to really see. And once you begin to see, then, the work of translation, or I've called it in the past transliteration, is not quite the right word, but I just like it. Transliteration is when you take a word or a letter and you use the closest corresponding letters of a different alphabet or script. So the Japanese term Zen is the transliteration of the Chinese Chan, the Sanskrit Dhyana, Pali Jhana for meditation. And so when we study, when we realize, and then we do the work of transliterating the Buddhist teachings into, let's call it a vocabulary for daily practice. And you've seen, my own way of doing that. Sometimes I will take a traditional teaching, I will massage it a little bit, and I will create an acronym, or I will create alliteration, like stop, soothe, shift, accept, allow, attend. No, attend, allow, accept. Switch. When I took that teaching from the Vitakasantana Sutta on working with thoughts, working with unskillful signs, and I created an acronym switch so that I could remember it. And also because it makes it a little bit easier to teach it. But this is my way of translating and then integrating the Dharma in such a way that in a moment when I need it, in a moment when I'm pressed, in a moment where I'm unsure about how to step, I have something ready to turn toward. Meaning available. It's available to my mind. But then there's also, an endless array of ways of doing this, just very practically. One of my friends had the 4 vows as her screensaver. So every time she started up her computer, or every time the computer went to sleep, which was not accidental, what she would see was the 4 vows. Or I was talking to someone who was realizing that, when they had all those open tabs, on their browser, several dozen tabs, perhaps several windows, that's what they were doing with their mind. That's how they were splitting their attention, even though they couldn't see everyone at the same time, of course, but that even the visual of it was splitting their attention. And so they decided, let me practice this. Shut everything down except the 1 or 2 that I need. Start it up every time you need it. Perhaps even use a gatha or a mantra as you're waiting for the thing to boot up, to open. I actually had a friend who did a gatha for opening the refrigerator because, she had a thing with food. And so she wanted to be very conscious every time she was approaching the danger zone. So she created a little gatha to open the refrigerator mindfully. Small thing with profound consequences. Think of what this can do for all sorts of addictive behaviors. It's going to take time. It's going to feel like a kalpa or 2, for things to transform. But this is how we do it. Guided by the question, how do I work with my mind? And, how do I work with mind? But how do I work with this mind? Zuisei's particular mind with my little idiosyncrasies. How do I work with myself? And of course, that already is practice. And that is integration. How do I take a 2,600-year-old teaching and bring it close? To know a lot about the Dharma, is useful to a point. To know a little bit about how to put it to use, that serves me well. And so we do certain things over and over again, repetition. Someone said that to me, once when I described, how the weeks and the months were at the monastery. They said, it's like you're doing the same thing. Every day is the same thing. I said, no, it's not the same thing at all. I mean, on the outside, it might look like I'm doing a few things over and over again. It's never the same. How could it be? It was like looking out at the vast ocean of being like, oh, one wave, you've seen them. You've seen one wave, you've seen them all. You've seen the Pacific. You've seen all of it. Our certainty kills. I mean, it kills wonder for sure, but it can kill our living. And so how do we live so that each moment brings life into life, lets life be life? I was reading, this is a little bit of an aside, but I was reading a commentary on the Vinaya, the monastic rule. And I had never seen this before. I don't know why, but this time I stumbled across the fact that the reason monks were not allowed in the early school, in the Theravada school, the school of the elders, so early Buddhism, the reason monastics were not allowed to work, particularly in agricultural jobs, so they weren't allowed to till the land, etc. I thought that they were not allowed to work, period. It wasn't a stricture against work. This was specifically against agricultural work, because soil is considered a one-facultied life. And what that means is that it's one faculty, the faculty of touch, the sense of touch. So they believe that soil is alive through touch. However, soil processes what happens in it. So soil is considered living. Very simple form of life, but living, life nonetheless. And of course, all the many organisms and beings that are in it. But soil itself is considered a living being. And I was thinking, imagine really, truly living your life with this understanding, with this view of the sacredness of everything. I say this often, because it's what I aspire to, very much so. And because in such a life, everything is in fact sacred. Nothing is throwaway. And then the expression. And this is, I think, the one, although it's not the most difficult, I think it's the one that we get caught in the most, because we're so used to expressing in our usual ways. I say something, you hear it, you say something in response. It's very hard for us to imagine a different way of expressing an experience. So, that koan that I've quoted before of the 7 sisters, there's 7 sisters, they're all Dharma practitioners. And one day, one of them is like, let's not go to like the fairgrounds, picnic grounds. Let's go to the charnel grounds. For whatever reason, she decides this is a good thing to do because she's a Dharma practitioner. And another one says, that's just full of decaying corpses. Why are we going to the charnel grounds? And the other one says, no, it's good. Let's go there. And so off they go, they get to the charnel grounds, and one of them points to a corpse and says, there's the body. Where is the person? And another one pipes up, what? What did you say? And at that, all 7 of them become enlightened. There's the body. Where did the person go? What? And it's not just koans that are asking us, demanding for a fuller expression. Our life is demanding that. Our life is demanding that right now. You know, when the conventional way of being, of speaking, of acting is no longer enough, how do we respond? You know, it's one thing to speak of, you know, extending loving kindness to people you have difficulty with. It's quite another to be sitting there and grappling with your mind, you know, with that back and forth of, I don't want to, I shouldn't, is this right? But they don't deserve it. It's one thing to hear that this practice, this profound practice of loving kindness will benefit you first and foremost, but will in fact change the fabric of the world. And it's one thing to hear that, and it's another to experience it, to put your trust in it, because you begin to live it. And so, precision, with 3 minutes to go, I think this is what is needed right now for each of us to be very precise about our practice, very precise about what it is that we're turning our attention to. Where do I focus? What do I focus on? How do I focus so that I can most skillfully respond? Because life is not stopping. You know, for me to figure it out, it is coming fast and furious. And I'm crouching here in the median. And so how do I respond? What do I take up? What do I put down? Because it won't help me. What most needs my care and my love? And what is a gift that I don't accept? Because it is not mine, because it will not help me. So this is the last bit of a poem by Wong, Roshi. Something stirs when no thing, absolutely no thing works. Something stirs if and only if we see what cannot be seen. We hear what cannot be heard. A stance unfolds, a threshold appears. What?